Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Rena, and I'm a board member of Next Step, and have been involved with the organization for like 11 or 12 years now. Um, uh, Originally, kind of leading the One Love program, and then getting involved in all sorts of stuff. So it's been an amazing journey, and I'm really honored to be kind of facilitating us today. So before I introduce our kind of leading speakers, I just want to kind of set some framing for the conversation. We are at this this critical moment, this critical juncture in time, and I don't think I need to explain it. And I don't think I should explain it to any of you, but just to kind of acknowledge that we are all now living through. We're living through COVID-19. We're living through the latest iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement and the kind of movement for racial justice. And there's so much layered in that, so much as, we talked about the word intersectionality a lot in our call yesterday. There's just so much layered into what's going on. There's just COVID and the movement for racial justice alone are, have so many intersections. And then you add to that the kind of the lived experiences of the young people that we work with as they navigate, all of the intersections of their lives, from illness to stigma to family dynamics to, social and community dynamics to poverty and stigma and mental health, and many of whom are people, people of color. And so living through that already in their lives, with then the added kind of complexities and urgency and pressure and desperation and devastation and reflection of this moment in time. So there's probably a million other kind of adjectives that I can reel off, but I don't need to just try to convey the really kind of tangled web that we are now trying to exist in and trying to help our young people navigate. And so that we wanted to try to kind of just, pry open a little bit of a window in that tangled web today. We're only going to scratch the surface, but really try to convey a little bit about, what does this look like at kind of a macro level? What are some of the impacts that we see happening to people who are living the experience now? And then how does Next Step respond, and how can we respond in the most effective, compassionate, strategic way? So want to just introduce, I'm so excited to be on the call today with Sharday Fultz, who came into Next Step's existence about 9 years ago, first as a participant, and then years after kind of matriculating out of the program, she returned as a conference director and is now in her third year as a staff member. She brings a wealth of experience and expertise, particularly in facilitation and in program design, and Sharday will tell us more about her experience in a moment. I'm also really excited to be joined by a dear friend and colleague, Crystal Taylor Dietz, who's a licensed psychologist and the psychosocial director for Next Step, and has been with Next Step since 2013. She's worked with clients both domestically and internationally from ages 8 months to 90 years, so everybody, and has a passion for mental health advocacy, multicultural psychology, social justice, and the promotion of wellness and helping young people. And then lastly, we have Bill, of course, who founded Next Step along with Paul Newman in 2001 and has served as executive director and board president ever since. So we're going to start with Sharday. This is actually one of our first meetings, so I'm really curious and would love for you to indulge us and tell us a little bit more about how you came to the Next Step community. And then, a little bit about, the programs that you've participated in and are now running, and what's that lived experience for you and for the young people that you're working with every day?
Oh, wow, sure. So I sort of happened upon Next Step when I was diagnosed it was actually after having gone through treatment. So I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2009, and it was isolating experience. So I spent a long time trying to find different methods of support, and especially young adult support, because you kind of generally run into things for more elderly people or older people. So it took a lot of researching to find support within the young adult cancer community. And so eventually, I believe it might have been, let's see, it had to have been after my bone marrow transplant, so after 2011, so perhaps 2012-ish, that I found Next Step. And this was after having experienced maybe 5 other organizations. Like, I was really going hard in the paint, you know? And what was unique about Next Step was the fact that I saw more representation, honestly. And so when you talk about intersectionality, it was pretty evident to me that within the other programs that I visited, which are wonderful and phenomenal, I tended to feel just like a scotch othered, you know? And it wasn't an intentional action, it was just part of being a minority. And so since there wasn't a lot of representation in the program, there wasn't a lot of anything that really reflected me. And going to Next Step, being able to see like people in positions of leadership that looked like me and listened to the same music, it gave me this added connection. So I think that's what kind of like helped ground me to Next Step. And then of course it was just this sort of different approach with more of a focus on community and like what you put into it to empower yourself. So now let's fast forward after doing all that and coming back when, geez, oh Pete's. And I think I'll address your concern about like what's going on right now within our conferences. We've really had to flip it completely, like change the paradigm of how we approach planning the conferences due to everything that's going on right now. And one, of course, was going virtual, but another major concern for us was making sure that we didn't try to come to these young people just as like, Next Step, this is all that we do, we're going to stick to our focus, but we didn't want to separate their life experiences from what we do as an organization. You know, we want to meet them as a whole person, which again tags into that intersectionality. So we've been trying to be very mindful of not just saying, we're here to support you in whatever your illness is, but we want to support you as a whole human being and not negate the fact that you're a Black person or that you're being disproportionately affected by COVID right now. And, you know, trying to be sensitive to all these variables that are going on. So we've started about 3 programs that we've sort of cultivated to create spaces for certain types of conversations. We have a Marco Polo group, we have a Power Circle group, and an Empowerment Circle group. So the Marco Polo group is kind of like a very, Marco Polo is an app where you can just make like small snippet videos like, hey, this is how my day's going, you know, and other people can jump in or they could just type a message. And so we sort of use that to kind of check in on each other. And what's nice about it is that since it's connected to Next Step, they already know like the framework we work in, the fact that this is private, no one's gonna share your business. There's a standard of respect and compassion and no judgment. And also that they're with other youth who have, you know, are working within a lot of the same intersectionality concerns that they have. So Marco Polo is more of like the check-in area. And then the Power Circles are a little more of a support group aspect. So we still address these concerns about, um, you know, living with HIV, AIDS, or chronic illness, or young adult cancer. So staying within our general framework, but also allowing that space to be, what's really going on? How do you feel today? And make sure that they know they don't have to shy away from saying, I had a loved one who got COVID, or talk about how it's a lot harder to pay the bills lately. And so we try to create a space for support, no matter what that support looks like, and not in such a way where we're offering like some sort of service, but just a space to say, like, we see you, we validate that you're going through stuff, And so the other the other program that we saw was needed was the Empowerment Circle, which has really excited me, because the difference between the Empowerment Circle and the Power Circle is like actually a really, it's a quite a like large step from what we usually do at Next Step, because we don't particularly focus on education. It's more so like a self-empowerment, validation, providing, resources and things like that. But it's not exactly our normal to just like drop some knowledge, But what we saw in these conversations in the Power Circle and in the Marco Polo group was that our youth wanted to understand, they wanted to know, why are these things happening? What's going on? What can I do? How do I do it? What do I say? So what we do in the Empowerment Circle is use our own knowledge, some of the staff, like our knowledge of what is going on. We incorporate perspective, me as a Black woman living in this world with health issues, with experiences of interacting with the police, and just my personal perspective. And we also draw from staff's own research and their general growth on these subjects, and try to just explain like major terms and give a general understanding of what's going on in the world we live in, and not so much to like charge them with like this call to action, but again, it's another opportunity to create a safe space where they feel they can ask these questions that are kind of awkward, but they're with people that they know and trust, and they know that they aren't going to be condemned or judged. And then after we give a bit of education, we create a space for conversation. And that's that kind of falls back in line with like the standard Next Step approach of like, let's talk it out, let's find out where you are and what do you need and how can we support you in that. So the empowerment circles have been going really well, especially despite the fact that we didn't like sit down and plan out this giant framework. We were just like, oh my gosh, they need this. How do we do it? Let's put something together. And we're just grateful that it's really taking off. And it's just been, it's just been honest conversation. We do the research, we try to answer some questions, and then it's more so giving them a space to ask those questions and discuss them and learn something.
Thank you so much, Sarday. That was amazing. And I think that there's so many themes that kind of threaded throughout that narrative. But I think the one that sticks out to me the most that you just kept coming back to was community, right? And how like your search for community, right? And your finding community at Next Step. And the ways in which now this community is just providing the foundation for everything that comes next, right? For learning, for growth, for validation, for kind of self, interrogation. And it's like for a young person who's living with illness or and everything else going on, like so hard to do that work on yourself and that education of yourself and that self-growth without the community first, because
Yeah,
you need to be validated, you need to be supported, and you need to know that there are others out there who are doing it along with you and who have done it and succeeded. So and I think that because that community and foundation is set at Next Step, then you can like rapidly respond to what the needs are
exactly.
now and build programs on top of that. But having that foundation is so critical.
Yeah, we couldn't do it if we didn't have the trust of these youth. You know, these weren't like participants who just came out of nowhere and were like, oh, I'll join the empowerment circle. Like, we're grateful that we have had time to establish these bonds where we can invite them to this and they're like, okay, I can do that. I feel safe here. So I think that just really speaks to that community aspect and one of the novel things about our programs.
That's amazing. Thank you. Crystal, I'm going to turn to you. I mean, I am not a mental health professional, but my assumption is that um, there's probably a lot of positive mental health effects of that community. But I wonder if you could talk to us, maybe even pull us back a little bit and talk about anything you are seeing, reading, working with around the mental health impacts of the moment that we're in, particularly on the populations that we work with, and maybe speak to, the uniqueness of those issues, and then also the uniqueness of Next Step's approach when it comes to mental and psychological health.
Sure. So, I think the first thing that's important to just name about this time is that it is a collective crisis, right? We are in a time of collective crisis, and there's actually, intersecting crises that are happening. And so I think when you put it in that framework, then we would expect that people in general are having a lot more feelings of anxiety, a lot more feelings of depression, as a result of one having never experienced this time before, in terms of COVID and a pandemic, but also I think just in terms of many of the resources that people typically have access to have been taken away. And so if we think of our youth and young people, they're at this critical time in life where they're trying to figure out the world of adulting, right? And so, prior to all of this happen, they're using their resources of their friends and their community and family that they have. And, whether they're in school or they're trying to get jobs and they're trying to figure out how to be more independent. And now we're thrust into a period of time where people who have chronic illnesses and people who have a lot of intersecting environmental variables that make their life more difficult on a regular basis, right? Whether that be healthcare, access to healthcare issues, financial issues, work issues, issues connecting with groups of peers. And now we're in a time of social isolation and physical distancing. And for those that have chronic illnesses, not being able to go to work, even if they had a job that they could have, the risk of going to work and what that means for them. And if they are going to work, the anxiety that comes along with that. So it just is a lot of compounding variables for our youth coming together at one time. And then I think when we look at the racial dynamic, of course, we do have a lot of youth that are from communities of color, and that are Black and brown people, and they're dealing with their own personal experiences of these racial issues and the injustice that they feel. But then we also have our white youth who are friends with these youth who are going through these experiences and who are also coming to this new period of thinking about their race in a different way, right? They're hearing about white privilege and they're hearing about all these different terms that they probably haven't ever had to digest before, right? And so everyone is in this period of time where they're questioning and thinking about their identities and understanding their identities in a different way. And so when we think about intersectionality, we have the abilities and disabilities piece, we have the racial piece, we have the socioeconomic piece, we have the where they are in their work, school, education, access piece, that's all coming together at one time. And so I think it is, unfortunately, kind of a perfect storm of crises that's going on. And so it really is important for us to respond in a different way. And so I think that's why Next Step has been an organization I've loved working with, and that's why they've looped me in for this many years. It's because we're so good at reinventing when there's a need, right? And being able to answer a need. And I think that the youth see that. And so, as you know, Sade was talking about the different things they've done, the Marco Polos, the power groups, the empowerment groups, being able to see where the need is. I think as an organization, the way that we approach mental health and psychological health is overall wellness, right? So we're not a mental health provider or a treatment provider. So we're not doing direct therapy with you. We're not diagnosing you. What we are doing, again, because we're looking at the whole person, is we're coming into this saying, hey, what are all of the aspects of wellness that you're dealing with right now? So that means your physical wellness, that means your emotional wellness, that means your mental wellness. And how can we be present to you in all of those things, right? And so in order for us to do that, then we have to allow space to talk about the emotional things that are difficult, to talk about the mental health difficulties that come up, to talk about the trauma. And that's a really important word, right? All of our youth have been through trauma associated with their medical experiences. And then we're in a time of trauma. And so a lot of those things get re-triggered for people. Even, you know, you've been working and recovering for a long time, and then a situation like this happens and it can take you back to those things in a very visceral way. And so being able to say, we're here for all of that. And although we might not be your provider, we know it's important for us to understand you as a whole person, to be able to have space to talk through that, and for your community members to hear you naming those things so they can say, oh, I'm not the only one, right? That stigma, the same way that we have stigma around the medical stuff, there's stigma around the mental health stuff. So if we're not able to open up a space for it, we can continue that stigma. But I think what I've seen at Next Step is that even in my time there, right, like this idea of mindfulness, right, we went through kind of talking about like, what is mindfulness and what does that look like, to having these, you know, meditation sessions where people are laid out on the floor and they're doing deep breathing and they're listening to progressive muscle relaxation, and people love it, right? And so that's the kind of progress that I think we want to see. And then they're able to take those skills. We're able to talk about, okay, well, how can you take these aspects of emotional coping, these aspects for psychological coping, and use them in your day-to-day life? What can 2 minutes of mindfulness exercises look for you, and how can it be beneficial for you, right? What can 2 minutes of muscle relaxation look like for you? Or what can white noise do to your sleep patterns? You know, and so those really practical ways of thinking about how we can take those coping skills that somebody might learn in therapy, but that we're talking about as a group, and how you can apply them to your day-to-day life in a way that's going to help your overall wellness. Did that answer your questions, Rena?
That was awesome. I think what I love so much, Crystal, is that you went, like, you were able to kind of give us some of the macro perspective, but then get really down to the tactical of like, here are the things that Next Step is able to do with young people to help them in their day-to-day existence and response to everything going on. You know, in addition to kind of exploring and interrogating these really big, really complex issues and questions. And again, the only way to do that, besides, reading lots of books and articles and everything coming through on, across our desks now, is to have a safe space and a safe community to really explore those things with. And when it comes to race and privilege and class and disease, I mean, these are all things that make it extremely hard to have those conversations anywhere else.
Absolutely. And if I could just say one more thing, I mean, what we know about all the research is that young people who have support and who have safe spaces are the young people that thrive, right? And they're the young people that have the least amounts of suicide, they have the least amounts of homelessness, they have the least amounts of comorbid other diagnoses, least amount of substance use. And so we know that if we create a place where they feel safe to talk about these things and feel like it's a place that they can have shared experiences with other people around their mental health and around their emotional well-being, then they're going to be better off, outside of Next Step space as young people.
Thank you. That's awesome. I want to be respectful. I know we started late, but we are at the half hour. So I'm just, should we go 10 more minutes? And if folks can stay on, that's great. Everyone yeah. Okay, great. So, Bill, I want to leave quite a bit of, as much of that 10 minutes as possible to any questions from the group, but Bill, maybe you could just begin. I'll start with the questions. So everybody think about your questions or put them in the chat. But Bill, why don't you just, catch us up on on what's happening at Next Step. And, you know, what is the, I think we're all starting to come to terms with the fact that going back to normal is either never going to happen or certainly not going to happen for quite a while, even for the healthiest and most privileged of us. So, you know, what does new normal continue to look like for Next Step, and what's the like long-term trajectory in your mind right now?
Well, the most exciting thing is the team that we have to be able to put to this task. And it was, I think it was a little daunting because the most important factor was the community itself. So the community provides the power that then allows for all of these wonderful things to happen, is because you're in a shared and safe space. So how do we do that without being in a shared space? That was the question that we posed to the team, and they have immediately they started the Marco Polo groups, the Instagram lives, the power circles, the Empower circles, and we're pointing towards what's coming up starting next week is our virtual conference. So the conference model is kind of the longest term tool that we've had in the toolbox, and the most profound, I think, as far as impact. And it's multi-days, and you know, they're getting workshops and these opportunities to have small, intimate sessions as well as larger group sessions, and have these discussions, as well as have people that are teaching them and dropping knowledge on them, as well as having downtime to really just connect. So the team has created a model. It's 23 hours. I think it's actually up to 25 hours now, over a 3.5-day period. And we're using multiple different ways for people to access each other virtually. And we've created a conference that's online. And we're very excited. We're going to deliver our first one next week. And we've got 3 of them over the course of the summer, and then we'll have at least 2 more this fall. But the youth, as always, the youth were part of the development of the process, and they told us what time of day works best. What are the different channels we can use? How long should I be sitting in one place? You know, when does my butt fall asleep? How many breaks should we have? And then the creativity of the team took over. And actually tomorrow, the group is coming to my house, and we're going to do a socially distant packing for all of our kits that are getting sent out to the first group for next week. So the impact of that long term is really an interesting question, because I think it allows us to really consider some limitations that we've had in the past. These are hurdles for those limitations, including geographic limitations, dealing with the issue of infection with certain disorders, also being able to work beyond some of the care needs that some folks might have that might not allow them to be residential. So we can open up to whole new groups of youth that can now access our program. And we're thinking about lots of different ways. One of the most, we've always considered, how can we effectively work with patients that have cystic fibrosis? Because if you put more than one patient with cystic fibrosis in a room, then the cross-infection can be a terminal issue. So we've never been able to do it, and they've asked us. And if this is successful, which it's going to be, it already is, we now have a way that we can reach out to that community. So the long-term impacts, Rena, to answer your question, are still unfolding. But I think that there's so much potential for us to really be able to impact more people and create that safe space on a broader level. So I'm very excited. And for your answer, how is Next Step, or the question of how is Next Step, we're doing well. I think we're really excited. I think some of the economic realities are the same for us as they are for everyone else. But we also have a great team that's very creatively working on that, and we're keeping ourselves moving forward, and we're in fine shape. And I think the community has really showed up to support us and keep the work happening. So we're very grateful. But of course, there's a little bit of nerves about what's down the road as far as the economic recovery after this is concerned. But in general, we're very excited and incredibly grateful for what the future holds.
Thanks so much, Bill. I love having optimism these days. It's so important. I just want to, does anyone want to chime in, ask questions, give comments? We have a couple minutes left. Just want to open the floor to everybody.
If I could just tag on to what Bill said when he thinks about like the future of Next Step, I feel like this crazy moment actually kind of implies this evolution of the program. Like when I think back on how just the fact that small things like representation made it mean more to me as a participant, now we're seeing how intersectionality affects the participants' interaction with the program. And I think everything we're learning right now, we're going to implement and continue to implement in the future. And I think that'll just only make it more robust and more community-based and welcoming across, now that it's online, like, whoa, who can we reach? So I'm really excited about that.
Thanks, Sade. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. And, back to the idea that like, if the foundation is the community and, it almost doesn't like, we could bring youth together who are living through anything, like it just feels like it's not, maybe I feel like, when Next Step started, it felt very much focused around the disease groups, right? And yet now suddenly we realize is that there's so much more, everyone has so much more in common than maybe we even knew before. And once you set the foundation and set up communities, you can build community around any of these lived experiences, which might have to do with the disease you are surviving, or it might not, so one question. Yeah, sorry.
So Ren, so the unintended consequence of what we're having to go through allows us to remake ourselves in a way that allows us to serve, I think, similarly or almost similarly, the constituents that we have, but also to just throw the net so much wider, to your earlier point, because there's so much commonality across all the universes, and it doesn't have to be such a commitment of travel, et cetera, because we can just get on a Zoom. And I think it's going to make us a very much stronger organization, and it's going to allow us to help more people.
Thanks, Ren. Barbara asked a really good question, which is, so, we're talking about the strength of having a community, and that's almost what's made shifting into virtual mode easier because the community is already there. What about new people that come in though now? Like, how do we, as Barbara says, build confidence in the program, or maybe, and also build community with people who are actually new to the community and can't have that literal, like, in the flesh moment that is so powerful for most?
Maybe I could speak a little bit to what we call our psychosocial calls. So we have a structure where anyone who fills out an application for Next Step, they go through a psychosocial call, meaning one of the staff members calls the person and kind of says like, hey, we got this application, but what's up? Like, tell us more about you. We're going to tell you more about us. We're going to tell you more what you can expect. We want to get to know you. We ask them more about kind of how their year has been, medically, again, looking at the whole person. So medically, socially, psychologically. But we do it in a way that it feels like we're having a conversation. And with this year, we're doing that virtually through Zoom, just like the conference will be, so that it kind of socializes both parties to what that might feel like in a conference. And we can kind of say, so, hey, how does this feel? Because the conference is going to be kind of like this, right? And so we can kind of give them a snapshot. And so I think that that's really key, because I think that that's actually kind of what gives them the first taste of what Next Step feels like. And we can feel out whether this feels like something that the person is ready for, and they can feel it out. And I think that's the first part of kind of establishing community. And then maybe I'll let Sade speak to kind of program wide, kind of what some of the things we're doing are to kind of bring people more into the mold.
Yeah, sure. One thing we've implemented is an orientation where we are inviting some of our present participants to come in for sort of like a Zoom kind of almost like crash course, and like, what is Next Step? What are you going to expect? So we have previous participants join us, and we'll have some of our new participants, those who are willing to do the orientation. And it would kind of just be like baby steps to introduce them to the program and what it looks like, and give them sort of a sneak peek into what to expect during this time together. And also, just frankly, like, this is still new to us. It's still so new, and we're just like diving in. And we thought, like, okay, the least we can do is orient them, like, literally. So that's one of our first approaches that we're taking, to consider people who just have no idea what next step is. So we're feeling optimistic about it.
Great, thank you both. I think it's really helpful to hear about the process. And also, Sharday, I'm thinking about what you said at the beginning, you know, how you had looked at 5 different programs, and it wasn't until you came to Next Step that you felt that sense of connection. And so the having a call with Crystal or somebody else from the program, and also having the orientation, by the time someone then gets to actually participating in the program, it sounds like they're already going to have that sense of comfort, right?
Yeah, we want them to come in at least knowing someone's name already, you know, not just like a deer in headlights. It's like, okay, if anything, you know, you met so-and-so, or you know Sharday, or you know Crystal, so that there's at least that beginning connection that, you know, we can use to help spur them to make more connections.
Yeah, that scaffolding. It sounds really helpful. Thank you.
And I think one of the key skills that Next Step possesses is that initial meeting of the group. The first couple of hours, we call it the extended handshake. We have a definitely scaffolded process by which kids or the young people come in, and they become connected to smaller groups, larger groups, larger groups, larger groups, until they're ready to face the entire group and feel confident. And there's a lot of silliness, there's a lot of initiatives, there's a lot of laughter, and then there's also a lot of sharing. And for many people, the first time that they can share the initial aspects of their particular diagnosis or circumstances in a group like this, in a comfortable way, because everybody in the room is on the same page as they are, because they've all been there. So that's consistent, and we've found a way, I believe, and we're going to find out this next week. I think we found a way to do that virtually, and create these initiatives and activities online in a way that's also going to make them feel that sense of connection and belonging, and understanding that this is a community that they can, that gets them because they've been there.
I'm having FOMO. I want to be there.
The commute is very short, Rena.
That's true.
Come on in.
All right. Well, listen, I'm gonna take the facilitator's rights, or whatever it's called, and wrap us up, because I know at least I am being summoned, and I know we've already kept folks over time. It's so nice to see Asa. Hi, Asa. So cute. So unless there are any other burning questions or comments, going once, going twice. Okay. I just want to thank everyone so much. And this has been a wonderful, far too quick conversation. And as I said in the beginning, you know, we literally just like peeked into the little window of the web. I made up that metaphor just now, by the way, but of the, you know, complexity of what's going on. But I think the message I'm taking away, as I go to get my sour beer and enjoy the rest of my evening, is that there's so much hope and optimism in this conversation, and it's not sugarcoating anything. It's super authentic, and it's just so beautiful to have a community and an organization that can find that hope and optimism and innovation and ability to flex quickly in the moment that we're in spite of the moment that we're in, and then also digging into the moment that we're in, without being blind to it and avoiding the hard stuff that comes with it. So I just feel super honored to be part of this community, and it's so wonderful to be with you guys like this, and I hope that we can be together in the flesh sometime soon. So please follow up, you know, please ask questions, please, you know, email any of us about how you can get more involved, get more information, get dropped more knowledge on, and continue to be part of this community as we survive and we thrive. So thank you so much. Next up, you're amazing. And I hope you all stay safe and happy and healthy and sane.